couple of weeks back, Daniel made the claim that milk has substantial negative consequences for your health. Tonight, I am arguing that his claim does not hold water once further more thorough research is conducted. His secondary claims were that drinking large amounts of milk does the opposite of what the U.S. Health Department states it does, that drinking large amounts of milk every day increases the chance of cancer, and that milk nowadays is homogenized, which alters the milk's chemistry and increases its negative health effects. In response to these claims, I say that drinking milk does not cause the negative effects that Daniel claims they do. The claims that are presented are not sufficiently backed up by the evidence presented, and that there is not enough evidence to definitively prove that homogenized milk has the negative effects previously stated. Daniel claimed that milk causes a depletion of calcium. That is not true. It is not supported by scientific evidence. Milk does not have the negative effects that were claimed. The evidence used was a study by Dr. David Ludwig and Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard. While it is true that they found that there were not strong ties between milk and its positive effects, they also did not dismiss milk entirely as something negative. There's never been such a strong evidence base for these recommendations, says Dr. David Ludwig of Boston Children's Hospital pediatrician, who co-authored the commentary with Dr. Walter Willett, a nutrition researcher at Harvard School of Public Health. We're not arguing that milk should be eliminated from the diet, but that a broad range of recommendations might be more appropriate. Calcium depletion caused by milk is also an issue that is raised and is not backed by any scientific evidence. The article used by Daniel to support his claims explained their reasoning as follows. Like all animal protein, milk acidifies the body's pH, which in turn triggers a biological correction. You see, calcium is an excellent acid neutralizer, and the biggest storage of calcium in the body is, you guessed it, in the bones. So the very same calcium that our bones need to stay strong is utilized to neutralize the acidifying effect of milk. Once calcium is pulled out of the bones, it leaves the body via the urine, so that the surprising net result after this is an actual calcium deficit. Chris Kresser, a globally recognized leader in the field of ancestral health, paleonutrition, and functional integrative medicine, states, the majority of evidence indicates that conventional wisdom may actually be right about dairy. Clinical studies have found that drinking milk leads to a positive calcium balance, indicating that more calcium was absorbed than was excreted. The claim of a pH imbalance is also challenged by Candace Fenton, a member of the Department of Community Health Sciences at the University of Calgary. He states, measurement of an acidic pH urine does not reflect metabolic acidosis or an adverse health condition. The modern diet and dairy product consumption does not make the body acidic. Alkaline diets alter urine pH but do not change systemic pH. Net acidic excretion is not an important influence of calcium metabolism. Milk is not acid producing. Some evidence presented in defense of milk's negative effects is not substantial. I said that the evidence presented is not substantial, but for some of the claims, the evidence isn't even presented. I looked through the evidence provided by Daniel and found nothing to support the claims that women who drank 3 glasses of milk or more every day had doubled their risk of death and had an increased risk of cancer, or that men's overall risk of death increased about 10% when they drank 3 or more glasses of milk daily than those who drank less. The final evidence he has to support his secondary claim was that those who consumed calcium from milk broke more bones than those who rarely drank it. A study published in British Medical Journal performed an observation study and saw each additional glass of milk consumed daily by women was associated with a 9% increased risk of hip fracture and a 15% increase of death from any cause. But the research also stated that the results may reflect what is known as reverse causation. The women drinking the most milk may have increased their intake because they had been told by their doctors that they had low bone density or a high risk of osteoporosis, and thus were already at an increased risk of having a fracture. The topic of confounding research brings me to my final point, that there is not sufficient evidence to prove that homogenized milk has negative effects in humans. The jury is out on the effects of homogenized milk on human beings. The source used by Daniel to support the claim of homogenized milk's negative effects is an article written by Vivian Goldschmidt, who used a study performed in 1998 to prove that homogenized milk in cows injected with RBGH, a synthetic hormone used to increase milk production, is bad for your health. Even worse than that, Goldschmidt is not a medical doctor. She has a master's in arts and is biased in her use of the information since she is trying to sell a book on saving your bones. Of course, she is going to want to list the negative effects of homogenized milk in order to catch readers' interest and sell her book. An article written by the American Cancer Society uses more recent information, with the oldest article being in 2002 and the newest in 2014, and says that the available evidence shows that the use of RBGH can cause adverse health effects in cows. The evidence for potential harms to humans is inconclusive. It is not clear that drinking milk produced using RBGH significantly increases IGF-1 levels in humans or adds to the risk of developing cancer. More research is needed to help better address these concerns. When more research is done, the myths around milk negative effects are dispelled. Daniel presented an argument for milk's negative effects, and tonight I have shown that drinking milk does not cause the negative effects that Daniel said it did. The claims presented were not backed up by sufficient evidence or by any evidence, and finally that the negative effects of homogenized milk cannot be determined at the moment. Milk's positive effects are still under question, but I hope you can all see that the negative effects of milk are not present.
All right, well, you've got an excellent layout of what the secondary issues are going to be. You preview what your general responses are going to be to those points. As you get to the individual points, I thought you did well to begin with signposting the main point. You criticized the well, not so much criticize, but analyze the research that the advocate used from Ludwig and Willip, and in essence suggest that they diminish their claim to some degree because it's not as firm as the advocate suggested it was. The calcium argument, I think, is explained pretty well. I did think that you had a good piece of evidence that demonstrated that there seems to be a positive calcium balance. That's the evidence that comes later. The pH issue is explained a little bit, but it does get kind of confusing. I do think that there needs to be a way to simplify this argument. I'll tell you what, if you're reading a paper, this all makes a lot of sense, but you're listening to an oral argument, it's easy to get kind of lost in the minutia, so you want to be careful about that. Like I said, I think I would try and rely a little bit more on the Kresser evidence that you've got there that shows that there is a positive net calcium benefit, and argue that the pH issue has not been demonstrated sufficiently and leave it at that. Your signpost on the next point was not as distinct as it was on the first point. You challenge the absence of evidence here. You say the advocate presented a claim about doubling the risk for women who consume milk and a 10% increase in risk of death for men who consume 3 glasses or more. You say there's no evidence on that particular point. All right, so there's no source citation. They said this particular information. Now, you did get an outline. You might tell us what efforts you made to discover whether or not any of this information was in any of the sources that were presented in the bibliography. I think that that would strengthen your argument on this position. That's a reasonable challenge to make here and say, look, if you go back and listen to the argument, they don't give a source on this. There's no reason to believe that it's true. Then when I looked at the bibliography that they provided, nothing in any of the bibliographic citations provided this same sort of information, so I'm not exactly sure that we should even be arguing that particular point. I think that would be a good way to present it. The British Medical Journal thing, I do think like you've got a good explanation of what that reverse causation issue is. That's a good illustration of the point that we talked about, you know, which is the cause and which is the effect. Is it that they are having bone issues because they consume a lot of milk, or are they consuming a lot of milk because they have bone issues and they've been advised to do that? I thought that was a pretty reasonable explanation of that particular point. The third point, I'm not really sure it's the homogenization of milk that is the controversy here, so much as it is the presence of the bovine growth hormone. I think you demonstrate that there's inconclusive information on this particular point, and you got a nice challenge to the evidence that the advocate used in this point also. All right, thank you.
Sugar. What the hell?
I'm sorry. I hope that wasn't me. Do you want me to put it back in order? I can try and remember.
Oh, no, it's okay. Probably. I hate to point fingers, but it's okay. We got it.
Keep my feet away.
No, I hate that I'm using it, and I could put it up here. I'll try and do it that way.